I'm going to do that. So hopefully you guys should see what I've got in here in front of me. And we're going to dive straight in. So basically what we did last week, or 2 weeks ago, if I remember correctly, if my old memory serves me well, is that we talked about sort of spine and rib cage and stuff like that, right? So I think we're going to move the way I like to progress through the human body is I like to sort of go from down up and then from up down again. So we meet at the core because essentially the core problematic and the way the different muscle groups work together around the core area, meaning your abs, your lower back, your glutes, and your flexors. It's one thing that is really interesting, but it takes a little bit of explaining to do. So I would like to establish first everything else around it. So we are now going to move to the muscles of the neck and then move our way down, essentially. Yeah. So let's just do that first. So, right. Okay. So before I do that, actually, we have finally managed to sort out the muscle and the motion app, and there was a login for that. So what I'm going to do at the end of this lesson, I'm going to post on your teams the login for the website. Because if you go on the muscleandmotion.com, it's really restricted and doesn't actually let you log in without the login details. So it's now been paid for, and all of you can just use the same login, go on and use it as a study material. It's really, really helpful. Yeah. So these snapshots actually that are in this PowerPoint are from that app. Right. Okay, moving on. So we've got sort of some muscles around the neck area that we need to talk about. So I'm going to start with them, right? Before we even look at that, the muscles in here at the front neck area, what are they going to do? What are they going to facilitate? So if I'm going to ask you what the muscles at the front of the neck, what do they do in terms of the movement of your neck or movement of your head? Would that be sort of flexion, extension, or try to explain which way will they be moving your head? Try to unmute and just talk to me. And don't look through your notes, just think about it, What do you think? So the muscles at the front of your neck, what sort of movement of the head will they do? Will it go back, or will it go forward, or will it go sideways?
It would do it all.
We do it all. Well, it wouldn't necessarily do it all. It would do some of it. So look, if you think about your arm, if this is my arm in this way, so the muscle at the top in here, if it shortens, if the bicep shortens, and then the muscle on the tricep will then extend it. So same principle applies to the neck. So muscles at the front of the neck do one thing, and muscles at the back of the neck will do something else in terms of movement of the head back and forward. So which one will do which? So I've got muscles on my neck here. What happens if they contract? Forward, right? Okay, cool. Bear in mind, guys, I can't see you. I can only see a couple of you because I've got this across my screen. So if you want to talk to me, just unmute and just shout down the mic. Yeah. So essentially, muscles at the front of your neck facilitate the neck flexion this way, and the muscles at the back of the neck facilitate the neck extension. Right? So sort of think of head forward or head back. Right now, when we did abs, was it yesterday? We did those 8-minute abs, isn't it? How did you feel about the muscles of the front of your neck? Were they quite sore?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we've talked about this before, where the muscles of the front of your neck are hypotonic. Yeah, so they tend to be weak, and the muscles at the back of your neck are the ones that tend to be quite tight. That's why you see people that have, if their back of the neck is tight, it allows the chin to go forward, and that means that this is sort of a week. Yeah. So what happens often when you're going to be working on your abs muscles and you're going to be doing crunches or anything, laying down, lifting yourself up, your neck muscles are naturally going to be quite sore. So what a lot of people do is just put their hands behind the back, behind the head, and just sort of help it, which sort of works. But what that results in is that your muscles at the front of your neck will continue. So it's really actually quite important that because the muscles of the front of your neck that stabilize and help to stabilize your spine and stop it from doing this. Yeah, this is the strength in the muscles up here that will keep it there and not there. Right, now we'll just talk about those muscles for a little bit. So you've got a sort of muscle that's, this is a really horrible name. It's called sternocleidomastoid. So it's usually called SCM, sternocleidomastoid. Now, you know the sternum is this bone over here, and the clavicle is thing over here. So because it's got two heads and one of them actually sort of inserts on the sternum, another one inserts on the clavicle, then that's why it's a sterno and clado, and mastoid is just a type of a muscle. Yeah, so sternocleidomastoid, and it's this muscle that you can grab on the side of your neck. It's this big thing when you turn your head one way that sort of comes out. You can feel that here. That's called the sternocleidomastoid, and it's got actually what Eva said about, you know, moving all directions. With this specific muscle, it's actually true in a sense, because this one muscle moves it in various directions, but so that can be a little bit deceiving. So essentially it does, if because you have two independent muscles on both sides, right? That's how we're going to think about it. So if both of them work at the same time, then this happens. If you imagine if you're on your back and laying down and you want to bring your chin to your chest, then both of those independent muscles fire at the same time. They shorten and bring the chin in. Yeah, right. Okay. So however, also because of where that those muscles originate, because they originate on the sort of here on the occipital bone at the base of your skull, then because when they contract, they also allow you when you're standing up to do this and bring the chin forward. So in this case, in the SCM case, it actually does both. It does both that, and it does both this. Right, so it sort of allows you to stick that forward. And also what it does lateral flexion. So lateral means sideways, and lateral flexion means does that. So if only one of them contracts, then it helps you to do this. Yeah. So right, so that's your sternocleidomastoid. Right, so let me just right, okay, cool. So that's fine. Then a next group of muscles is, I mean, last week we talked about the structure of vertebrae and what those vertebrae actually look like. So we said that those vertebrae have three different processes. Do you remember? We said that the vertebra has a body and it has three different processes. Does anybody remember what they're called? Or where are they pointing? Nope. You've got three processes. So if you imagine this is my vertebrae, yeah, this is the body, and there's one process, as in things that sticks out to the side, another one, and then another one to the other side. So you've got this one, that's the spinous process, and that's the one that you can actually feel, you know, at the back. If you like hunch your back and put your and try to touch your spine, that those are the ones that's sticking out as that way. You've got two transverse processes that go out like that. What those transverse processes are there because there are muscles that attach to them sometimes, or one of the reasons anyway, right? So if you look at this picture over here, you've got these are the scalene muscles, essentially. Scalene muscles, SCALENE. Hold on, right? Right. And right. So their origin is the transverse processes are the C4, C5, and C6. All I'm interested in is that the scalene muscles originate on your cervical spine, so on the spine of your neck. You don't have to know which vertebrae exactly, but you need to know that they originate on the transverse processes, on the ones on the side, on the neck. And when they actually insert they insert to down here on your rib. So like some of them insert on the first rib, and some of them insert on the second rib. Scalene muscles are the ones that are right here on the side. So if you were to like take a finger and find this little sort of like a dimple that you have right behind your clavicle and go a little bit sideways and press down, those are scalene muscles. Scalene muscles are the ones that often cause headaches and often cause really sort of stiff shoulders and stiff traps. And those are essentially the muscles that facilitate head tilting. So when we do these sort of stretches, we sometimes do that in our warm-ups, don't we? Yeah. So that is predominantly a scalene muscle stretch. right? So because you're stretching the muscle that's between your spinous processes, sorry, transverse processes of your vertebrae and your ribs. Yeah, so that's what's being stretched to the side this way. Often, I mean, scaling muscles are the ones that respond really well to PNF. PNF is the one where you create isometric contraction, you relax, then it allows that the tone of the muscle to decrease, and then you can stretch it better. We've done this before, yeah. So these are your scaling muscles. So remember, scalenes sort of like link your spinous vertebrae, your neck vertebrae, sorry, your C vertebrae, and your ribs, and that's all you need to know essentially. And all they facilitate mainly is your head tilting like this. Those are scalenes. All right. Right. We've got a next one down. I mean, this one, we are now sort of moving slowly downwards. This is a muscle that, again, suffers from quite a lot of tightness, and it's called levator scapula. Now, levator meaning as in to elevate something, to raise something up, which means that it raises the scapula up, and scapula is a shoulder blade. And essentially, what it does most is allows your shoulders to raise up, right? And it also allows is if it's engaged one dimensionally, so if only one of them engages, then it allows you to sort of tilt your head to the one side. But we usually think of levator scapula mostly in the context of raising your shoulders up. Because if you want to raise your scapular up, you also raising your shoulders up, and levator scapula connects again transverse processes of your cervical spine, which is your neck spine, and your scapula. So it's this sort of top ridge on your scapula that you can see that it inserts onto. And again, I'm not specifically bothered about which of those cervical vertebrae it originates on, as long as you know that it originates here and it inserts at the top of your scapula, right? Okay, so levator scapula does elevation of your scapula, so elevation of your shoulders up, and it also allows you to tilt your head, but when it's firing on its own on one side. Okay. And we come to rhomboids. Now, essentially, this. So here's an interesting thing. So if you look at this picture on the left, that's your spine. These are your scapulae. You can see the direction of those muscle fibers in which those rhomboids are going. So you can see that actually the direction of those fibers goes upwards like that, right? It doesn't go down, but it goes up, and it goes up towards the spinous process. So you've got the vertebrae of your spine, you've got the spinous processes. If you look at somebody from the back, you've got the spinous processes that are sticking out, and you've got then the rhomboid muscles starting on your scapulae going upwards like this towards those spinous processes, like it's showing on the picture. Now, what does that mean? Just looking at the direction of those fibers, how can you infer the function of that muscle? What will that muscle be doing if you can see the direction of those fibers going this way? What will it be doing to the shoulders? Imagine that, muscle can only work through contractions. What happens when the distance between the origin and the insertion point decreases? What happens with those scapulae? They go up. Yeah. So essentially what you want to, sorry about that. What you want to think about is what rhomboids do is this. So they bring your shoulders together and up, right? So they raise your shoulders up like that. I hope you guys can see me because I can't see yourself. I can't see myself. But they bring your shoulders. Hold a second. Let me just grab this so I can. Just a sec. Just doing some weird stuff. Okay, I think we're on. Nice one. Yeah. So essentially, what it does is what your rhomboids do is rhomboids bring your shoulders back together and then up again. So they do this sort of motion up here, right? So if you were sort of asked what sort of muscles are responsible for scapular elevation, for raising your shoulders, depending on what you know so far, you would say elevate the scapula because that's the muscle that goes from here and the top of your scapula, right, from your cervical vertebrae, and it's your rhomboid muscles that essentially originate on your scapulae, and then they sort of the fibers go upwards this way towards your spine, processes of your spine. Yeah, so scapular elevation and adduction, it's really mostly the elevation and bringing your shoulders not only up, but up and back. So this is sort of rhomboids, right? Right. Okay, good. Right, brilliant. And now that is all from this presentation. I'm going to move on to another slide in a minute. Let me just quickly conclude again. So we have four muscles that we learned about just now. We have the SCM, which is the sternocleidomastoid, which has the two heads, one of which ends up on your sternum, another one of which ends up on your clavicle, and both of them originate in this point right here. And that's a muscle that's actually responsible for both flexion and extension and also tilting when only one of them works. Okay. Then we had scalene muscles. Scalene muscles are only responsible for tilting, and they go from your transverse processes of your C-spine all the way down to your ribs, essentially. And they go through your ribs like through I don't know if you guys can see it, through here. So if you ever have tightness in your like lower neck in this region, and if you sort of press down on your neck here, there, and press, and if it feels tight, that's your tight scalene muscles. So often if you go for a sports massage, you have a masseuse or a masseur getting into this area right next to your trapezius, sort of loosening off your scalenes. So those are your scalene muscles. And then we've got your levator scapula that goes from here. And sorry, I've digressed completely. Scalene muscles go between the transverse processes of your cervical spine and your ribs, and your levator scapula goes between transverse processes of your cervical spine and your scapula. So levator scapula, so it brings the scapula up. And then you have rhomboid muscles that are sort of go from your scapula upwards towards your spinous processes. And the way you want to think about this is that are the most sorry about that. The rhomboids are like the most superficial ones. So the muscles of your back are actually sort of stacked onto one. Let me just see if I can get this up. Just give me a sec. It's happening. I'm just going to get it up so I can see. I can show you guys. It makes more sense. It's just being slow. Sorry. Right, I'm in. Okay, cool. Let me just share this with you guys. I'm going to stop the share of this one, so we can have a look at this in a little bit better fashion. Okay, cool. This way, and then Sorry guys, it's just not letting me share my is that right? Is that gonna do it? I don't know what's going on with it. Sorry. I'll find a way how to get this to work. I think I'm gonna have to share my screen. I hope you guys can see this. It doesn't let me sort of share that, but it lets me share the screen. So hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing. Right, can you give me thumbs up? Is that all right? Yeah, okay, cool. Right, so hopefully this will sort of suffice. So if you look at the this app is I'm going to send you the login details, and this is all going to be accessible to you guys. You can log on and have a go at it and really have a look at this. So on the right, you can add and remove layers. So if I crack on this, then it removes a layer here, removes another layer here, removes another layer, another layer, another layer. So it's quite interesting, right? So if I go all the way to the top like that, in here, actually hold a second, so this is the platysma. I'm going to remove a layer here. So this is your sternocleidomastoid. If you want to rotate that and have a look at it, you can have a look at that. So if I then click on that muscle, it will then show you how the muscle actually works in practice. See what I mean? So you can see where it originates and where it inserts to. And you've got different videos on its different actions. So that was the first one, and this was the second one. So if you are laying down and bringing the head up, it works bilaterally like this. If I click on the second one, if you then bring the head up rather than this way, but this way, it also works in such a fashion. Okay, great. All right, now I'm going to move away from that. Head and neck. Okay, cool. Right. Now, if you look at this, look, your scalene muscles are buried quite deep underneath, and your scalene muscles look like that. So if I click on your scalenes, you can see how they facilitate the neck tilt. But what's really quite interesting, actually, having a look how those muscles stack on top of one another. So your sternocleidomastoid, you can see how big of a muscle it is, and it's completely out on here on the surface. Your scalenes are right here underneath. And if I was to then turn it around and remove a layer here, then you'll be able to see, if I can get down here, hold on, I think the levator scapula, no, levator scapula is going to be a little bit lower. You can see that that's the serratus. Hold on. And these are your rhomboids, yeah? So your rhomboids are there. If you click on it over here, you can see that they bring your shoulders together, but sort of they raise them up ever so slightly. Yeah, so this is, you can see you have the videos of different functions. So that's the first video that brings your shoulders together, and this is the second video that sort of brings them together and up. You can see that the way they contract, it sort of raises the shoulders slightly. Okay. And those are your rhomboids. And if I now, you can see on the left that I can sort of have a look at what I'm really looking at. So if I'm going to go on the torso and go up, that was too far, go too far, and I'm going to remove all these layers here, then I'm going to try and find your levator scapula, and I can't find it. Hold on. No. There it is. Finally, there we go. Yeah. So this is your levator scapular muscle, And this is what happens, right? So you can see that it originates on the transverse processes of your C-spine, and then it inserts at the top of your scapula. So when you contract this muscle, you bring in your shoulders up. Okay, and that's it. That's it for now. So let me go back. I'm just going to stop this share for the time being. Technology is not my friend today. Okay, good. And then minimize that, and we'll have the superficial muscles of the back. Right. Okay, here we go. So, and now we get into, again, for some reason it doesn't let me share that, but if I just share my screen, hopefully that will be enough. I don't know why it's not letting me share the actual thing, but hopefully you guys will be able to see that, right? So we are now moving on, guys. We are moving on like a little bit lower into superficial muscles of the back. So I'm going to start with this and sort of make, so I can unpack it a little bit more methodically. So trapezius muscle is sort of muscle that's being used even in sort of everyday lingo, and as dancers we hopefully know what trapezius muscle does. But when people talk about traps, they usually refer to the upper part of your trapezius here at the top of your shoulders, right? So it's that tends to get sort of quite tight and whatever, that raises our shoulders up. But actually trapezius is a threefold muscle that has three different sets of strands of muscle fibers. They're all, and as the muscle sort of operates together, but all of those muscles are, excuse me, responsible for different sort of movements. So if you look over here onto the left, it's pretty well seen down here. So if you look at this section in yellow, this section in yellow is the upper part. So that's the upper part that covers this area up here. If you actually, it's even better seen in here. If you look at the section in yellow in here, that's the middle part that essentially covers the middle part of your back. If you imagine, if you sort of draw a line between your shoulders, right in between like that, so that's the level where the middle fibers are. And then you've got the bottom fibers here that are at the bottom below that imaginary line going downwards. And each of those sets of fibers is responsible for, and it's quite easily inferred. So if you imagine where that muscle is, if you look at this picture here on the right, you can see that the muscle sort of leads from the base of your skull from here, and all those fibers sort of go outwards down towards your shoulder. So when those fibers contract, what happens is they bring that shoulder in and up, but sort of predominantly up. So when you do this, when you raise your shoulders up, you can really feel this tensing up, and all of that's your upper trapezius or superior trapezius. Yeah, and that's what these yellow fibers in this picture are excuse me, responsible for, right? Is the upper trapezius. Then middle one does, it actually brings your shoulders right together like that. So if I wanted to bring the shoulders together and stick my chest out, the use of my medial sort of the middle trapezius, if you will, yeah. And then conversely, additionally, if I then move on. There we go. It just froze on me for a little bit. Yeah, and if you look at the bottom sort of strands of those fibers that go from your scapula downwards, then these muscles are actually responsible for pushing your shoulders down and keeping your shoulders nice and solid. Now, the reason why, let me atrophy muscle actually works, and how those muscles do completely different antagonist sort of how they have an antagonist function to one another. So that the muscle sort of appears to be quite coherent and quite solid, and it appears like a sort of one set of strands. Well, what actually happens is the upper part of your which is up, and the bottom part of your trapezius, which is down here, which is below your shoulder blades, is to one another, right? So when one is moving, when in one set is contracting, the other one is relaxing, and vice versa. So if you bring in your shoulders up this way, then your bottom trapezius is relaxed, and this one is working. When you bring in your shoulders down this way, your bottom trapezius is working, and this one hopefully is going to be relaxed. Right. Now, which out of those two, if we just focus on the upper one and the lower one, which one's be hyper and which one's going to be tonic? If you imagine which one of those two is going to be the one that always works and it's quite tight and it's annoying how it sort of always wants to come in play, and which is the one that's weak, we need to focus on waking it up, strengthening it. Is it the one at the top or the one at the bottom? So what do you guys have a tendency to do? So what's the tendency to do, for example, when you get stressed or when you sort of not thinking or when your posture's not right? What do your shoulders tend to do?
Do you tend to hunch? Crack?
Yeah, you tend to, yeah, you can hunch essentially if you, even if you're not sitting down, what happens is sometimes you're like when you get stressed, now your shoulders just sort of come up here, don't they? Right. So this and also if you just imagine, if you think about it from the muscle perspective, is sometimes when you get tired or when you work hard or when you do some sort of upper body workout stuff, it's the upper trapeze usually tired, and hard is your upper trapezius, is that the one that's giving you the problem. It's giving you a problem because it's hard and stiff and wants to constantly work even though when you don't want it to. If you think of the correct posture is the shoulders down. So if you know those two, which one? So it tonic.
Thomas, your connection keeps cutting off. We can't hear you properly.
Ah, okay. Well, sorry about that. I don't know what to do about that.
It gets stuck and we miss some of the things that you're saying.
Oh, that's really irritating. Sorry about that. I don't know. The only way I can do downstairs and reset my router, I think that could possibly work. If you guys want to give me 5 minutes, you feel free to have a little bit of a drink. It's 35 past now. So if you guys want to come back at 22, I'm going to type, hold a second, I'm going to type it in the...
Are you on a laptop, Thomas?
Yeah.
If you have a lot of 4G on your phone, you can connect it to your 4G.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to work. You mean like a hotspot? I see what you mean, yeah, but I'm not sure if that's going to work. Let me just see if I can get this sorted out. You guys could do with it with 2 minutes anyway. So yeah, let's just sort of meet back. If you can't hear me, let's meet back and at 1:40, and hopefully I can sort my connection till then. Sorry about that. I'm at home and sometimes the sky is a bit of a pain. I'll be 2 minutes. All right. Hi guys, I think we're back in. Fingers crossed. It's looking good. It looks like I've got a full signal. I don't know what happened earlier. Is it still recording? Yeah, it's still recording. So hopefully we can pick up where we left off. We've got about half an hour left, so let's just pick up where we left off. I feel like I'm conscious I'm going quite quickly, so I'm just gonna go through all of this and go back and recap. Okay, so let me just share. The sharing doesn't seem to be working very well. I don't know why. Sharing doesn't work. I'm going to have to share my screen again and do this and do this. Okay, so up until now, when it comes to the superficial muscles of the back, we talked about the trapezius. Now, so the trapezius is the muscle that sort of sits right on top of your neck, shoulders, and your middle back. Yeah, it has sort of three different strands. There's the one at the top, one at the middle, and one sort of at the bottom. So the way you want to think about it is that the upper part is the one that is the hyperactive part. That's why it's so difficult to, the reason why it's so hyperactive is because often, for example, when we condition, when we do condition and when we sort of plank, naturally, it feels natural for us to sort of raise our shoulders up, right? The reason why it actually does that is just compensates. So if you're, if you're, let me just restart that point, sorry. So if you think about that, you've got your upper trapezius and your lower trapezius in juxtaposition. If the lower one is weak to keep the shoulders in place, for example, when you then set yourself up in plank, naturally, because purely due to the force of gravity and due to the way that your body is constructed, naturally your shoulders will start to roll forward. And it's actually, if you wanted to hold the biggest amount of weight, it will be easier to do it this way, because that way you are not only using your pecs, but you are also using your trapezius. So naturally, your body just does what's easiest, as in sort of, in terms of its utility, right? But what that causes is that it creates even more tension in your traps, and it inhibits the lower trapezius even more, and it sort of then perpetuates this problem of not only shoulders rolling forward, because that's more your pectoral muscles, but it's really just shoulders rising up, and it's sort of tension in your trapezius muscle. So when we talk about traps, it's always important to inhibit the always overbearing upper trapezius, and it's really important to wake up and engage the one that never really wants to wake up and engage, and that's the bottom trapezius. Yeah, so think about it practically. So what would you do if you wanted to engage the lower trapezius? So if we now know that the upper trapezius raises the shoulders up and bottom trapezius brings them down, what sort of exercises could I do to wake up my bottom trapezius? What could I do to strengthen it, or what could I do to activate it, if you will? What sort of exercise would be good for that? Again, feel free to unmute and just sort of think about it. So, because if I was to work on my traps, I would just do shrugs, right? So I would sort of grab something heavy and just push my shoulders up, and that would work my traps. Actually, bodybuilders tend to do that. Or so that brings the shoulders up. So what sort of exercise would I have to do to facilitate the pushing down? How would that work? What could you do? What do you think? Just have a think, have a guess, try to think about it. So also, when we think about sort of muscles at the front of your body and the muscles of the back of your body, we usually like to think of it in a way that the muscles at the front of your body facilitate any sort of pushing, and muscles at the back of your body facilitate any sort of pulling, right? So if you push something away from yourself, it's going to be everything at the front here that will work that. If you grab something and pull it towards you, then it'll be working on your back, right? But as in, we work on our back without pulling anything towards us, but it's utilizing the same principle. So try to think about what could you do? How could you add weight to you pushing down? Okay, think about it differently.
I don't know why it's called, but you know when you do that.
Sorry, but I can't see you. Say again.
Oh, I don't know why it's called, but it's when you go like down. I don't know. Your body's like you're holding your body up with your arms. I don't know what it's called. Sorry.
So
Can you
do you
see
mean a
me?
push up, or do you mean
It's
like
like-
a something? Hmm?
It's like when your legs are dangling and you go like this.
Oh, so you mean in the gym? Yeah. So yeah. So right. Yeah. Right. I see what you mean. So when you are get up high, you've got two levers like that. You grab them and you do tricep dips. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I think
Yeah.
that's
Right. Okay.
when
Cool. So, but let's say that we don't have a gym. Let's say we are in a dance studio, right? So, but something that's actually really similar to, right? So, if I was to, let's say, if I was to do a front plank, I know that I'd be working everything at the top. What happens if I reverse it and do a reverse plank? So if I've got a plank, but I'm not facing down, but I'm facing up, I'm facing towards the ceiling and keep my hands behind me.
You'd work your back.
I'd work my back, right? So that's exactly what it is. So because when I've got my hands below me, and I'm keeping my weight of my body because my feet are in front of me, so the weight is pulling my upper body down, and I'm resisting that pull by pushing into the floor with my extended arms, right? So that way, actually, I'm pushing my shoulders down in order to stay up and not to do this. So if you do this, I don't know if you guys can, oh, hold on. I don't know if you guys can see me. I've got this tiny little chair in here, right? So if I was to hold myself up like this, or whether I could do it here on the chair or on the floor, I can either do that and just let it go, which doesn't really do anything. But if I now push my shoulders down, this is where I'm now working my bottom trapezius and all the muscles that are below my scapulae. Yeah. So all the reverse planks, everything that you hold yourself down to lift your bum up on the floor, facilitates the pushing of the shoulders down against some sort of force, and that helps to wake those muscles up. Also, when you, for example, do things like flat back, but when you go forward into a flat back, because your arms are up, it's really difficult to keep those shoulder blades down, right? And that's what all the teachers tell you when you even when you warming up in jazz, for example, you're going to go side, you go into a flat back. It's about the shoulder being down and back so you can still engage all the muscles in your back, but it's quite difficult. But what you could do is you can pull those elbows in. I'm sure you've seen that done before when you go into a straight flat back forward and you pull the shoulders down this way. And when you do that, you then allow, by pulling them down and being basically parallel to the floor with your upper body, then you can also wake that bottom trapezius up and all the muscles that are around it that we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah. So it's all the pulling down essentially when you are forward. You can also do it on the floor. You can lay down on the floor, bring your arms up above you, lift your chest up ever so slightly and pull your arms down. If you're pulling them down, if you imagine, bear in mind that the muscle always moves the body part when it contracts. By doing this, it has to be your middle back muscles that contract that actually allow that to happen. Yeah. So that's really important because naturally, generally speaking, whenever you do anything in dance, particularly, we are really concerned about our posture, and particularly in jazz and ballet, it's always about this, right? It's always about inhibition on that and engaging the muscles sort of in your middle back so you can have this really nice long neckline and whatever. But that's not always easy when you doing other things. So that's why we're bringing it up. Okay, cool. So I'm not specifically bothered with trapezius because there's a lot of information around that, and I'm not going to be asking you about the origins and insertion points. But what I will be asking you, for example, what I've had done with students in the past, that I've asked them to draw it. So I would put like a sort of just a skeleton from the back on the piece of paper, and I would ask you to just draw out with a pencil the direction of those three different muscle groups in the same way as in here. And you don't have to be a Picasso to do it. It's literally just like lining, look, this is the upper one, this is the middle one, and this is the bottom one, and this one does that, this one does this one does this. I've done that before. So things like that are a good way of assessing knowledge, I think. Right. So that's your trapezius. Okay, so moving on. So well, actually, if we move into here, because there's another sort of really big muscle that I'd like to talk to you about, and this is called the latissimus dorsi, and we sort of call it lats, right? Now, you guys know every time, pretty much in every warm-up or in almost every warm-up that you do with me, after we do the stretches to the side, right? We do all these side ones, we do a fly back, roll down, and then we do sort of reaches up like that. And I always tell you sort of get your lats involved, right? So things like that are actually really good for activation as well as stretching of your lats. Lats are this sort of lats or lat is this big muscle below your shoulder essentially. When you see like bodybuilders sort of having really sort of developed physiques, then it looks like that. So they've got like a bit of a V shape going at the top, right? So that's what the lats are, but they just have them obviously massive. Yeah, but so it's these muscles right between your shoulder and sort of between your ribs. And lats essentially are responsible for keeping your shoulders down mostly, and also sort of arching your back and any pulling motion downwards. So if you think about, if you also look at the way the lats look, right? If you look at the insertion point, that's on the inside of your humerus right here, and then the origin, that's inside of your, so on the inside of your humerus right here, and then those fibers sort of come inwards and essentially cover your back from the outside this way, coming inwards towards the spinous processes of your spine like that. So again, it's a really big muscle that sort of goes from here all the way down your back. Right. So if you look at this picture that I'm showing here with you, which trapezius this muscle would be agonist with? Which muscle would the lats, now seeing what it looks like and what it does, you know, this guy over here is pulling something down. That's what the lats are doing, pulling motion downwards, keeping your shoulders down. Which out of those three trapeziuses that we've just spoke about does the same thing, which is the agonist muscle?
The inferior or the lower one?
Yeah, the lower one, exactly. Yeah, well done. So it's the lower one, the lower trapezius and latissimus dorsi are the two biggest muscle groups that are responsible for you to keeping your shoulders down, and then it's an antagonist to your upper trapezius muscle, right? So and again, I'm not particularly bothered about specific origins and insertion points, because it's quite a complex muscle in the way that it's laid out. But I would like you to just imagine and being able to draw it out, for example. Yeah, so it starts over here on your humerus, and it sort of goes downwards and covers your spine this way. Okay, I'm now going to go back to here. I'm sharing my screen so you guys can hopefully see that. And I'm going to go back to the torso. I'm going to rotate it this way, right? And we're going to have a look at this. So this is what your actual lats look like. It's a huge muscle. The excuse me, the bottom trapezius actually sits on top of it partially. It's pretty much your entire back. Sort of, it goes all the way from here. And if I click on it again, it sort of like shows me the detail of that. And it's got like 4 different functions in here. I can it allows you to pull down in any direction as you will. So it would either pull it up this way, or also if you grab something and you were to pull up this way. Also, if you you do that against resistance, or it also facilitates pulling this way. Yeah. So for example, when again, almost at every single warm-up, we do 2 different dynamic exercises that help us to warm up lats. Do you guys know which ones they are? And they're dynamic exercises, so not stretches, but dynamic exercise to warm those lats up. Do you know? And they specifically actually really utilize this one and this one. Do you know which ones I'm talking about?
Would it be star jumps?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So it's the star jumps, and it's both that go outwards, and all they're not really star jumps, but when your arms go upwards this way, because on the way down you are working your lats. On your way up, you warming all of this up, and all the way down, you're warming all of this up. So that's why we always put in focus on the downwards. Same thing when you're going outwards. When you're doing the star jump, in the upper phase of the star jump, it's all about the trapezius and your deltoid, and on the way down, it's all about your lats and your bottom trapezius. Yeah. So when we do things like that, remember every time we do that, I always say long neck, shoulders down. So that way, even when your arms are going up, when you're swinging your arms upwards, you can still make sure that those muscle groups that are at the bottom below your shoulder blades are still working. Yeah, because you don't want to be doing star jumps like this. You want to make sure that your shoulder, and you always have that for them to still for the muscles below your shoulder blades to still be able to take part. Okay, so yeah, so lats essentially facilitate any sort of pulling or any pushing downwards this way. Also, they come into play when you do push-ups or when you do plank. Yeah, they sort of, or for example, when you do side planks, we sometimes do side planks, don't we? So they work quite a lot in that sort of respect. Yeah, right. And those are our. Mm-hmm.
I need to go get the tray.
No problem, Meg. Have a good one. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, so we've got this. So we've just finished with lats, and I'm going to minimize this again, and I'm going to come back to here. Right, so we talked about trapezius and lats, so we are going to now move up before we finish to some more sort of muscles around your shoulder, if you will. So let me just come over here. So before I go into these different muscle groups, we will now focus on our shoulders. Now, we have so far spoke about 3 different muscles that help facilitate shoulder movements. Which ones were they? How do we call them? The shoulder muscles. How do we call the muscles that are on your shoulder? Guys, somebody must know. Come on, don't leave me hanging. How do you call the muscles that are on your shoulder that help you to move your shoulder in whatever direction? How do you call them?
Is it deltoids?
Deltoids, excellent. Okay, so you've got 3 deltoids. You've got your anterior, you've got your middle, and you've got your posterior deltoid, right? So the anterior does everything sort of pushing forward. The middle does all the abduction, and then the back one does all the pulling back. Other sort of muscle groups at the back of the shoulder that we've not spoke about yet. Now, I'm not actually going to talk about all of these, but I want you to be aware of that term. And it's actually not in this presentation, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly. And that is rotator cuff muscles. Does anybody know what that means, or what do those muscles actually refer to, or what does that group of muscles do? Rotator cuff. Have you guys heard about it? Like, I'm sure some of you must have done. Not quite? Okay, so rotator cuff, and again, this is not something that I'm going to go into too much detail. There are 4 different muscles, but what essentially happens with your shoulder is that your shoulder is very front heavy. I'm sure you all know that very much. So if you were to like grab something, like grab a pulley to the side and pull it to the front, you'll be able to probably pull almost twice as much weight as if you wanted to grab it to the front and pull it to the back. So the back of the shoulder naturally is just a lot weaker than the front, because most of the stuff that we do is sort of at the front, and we tend to push a lot more than we pull, right? It's just that's just how things are. So so there are muscles at the back of your shoulder that are called rotator cuff muscles, and they actually participate in stabilization of the joint. Shoulder is the joint that has the biggest range of motion out of all of the joints in your entire body. It's actually a really neat joint in that respect, because it gives us a lot of flexibility, but also it's a bit rubbish in the sense that there's a lot of shoulder injuries that that occur, and there are a lot of dancers that often suffer from shoulder injuries. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of those injuries stem from weak rotator cuff muscles, where the shoulder start sort of favoring any movements that are formulated, and so if you then and because the front of the shoulder becomes overly strong and overly tight, and the back of the shoulder, including the rotator cuff muscles, become weak, then the shoulders sort of tend to either pop out, or people tend to damage their ligaments because they're out of line and all that. So there's one exercise that's really good for rotator cuff muscles, for stabilization of your shoulder in the back direction. And that exercise is as such is, if you guys grab a band, you know, like a TheraBand, or sort of a piece of rubber, you can get them online for a couple of quid or whatever, and just tie them to something and grab it and keep your elbow inwards, and then pull your wrist outwards. I don't know if you guys can see it because I can't see it myself, but pull it outwards like that. So if you imagine that there's this bed, and I have tied something to it, something elastic, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to pull it outwards this way and back in again. The fact that I'm pulling it this way by keeping my elbow in, I'm strengthening and conditioning my rotator cuff muscles. And that is really helpful, because most dancers' rotator cuffs, unless they work on them, tend to be quite weak, and they contribute to weaker, sort of like a lesser shoulder stability. And that's why a lot of people have, like a lot of dancers tend to have problems with their shoulders, either early in their career or later on or whatever. So rotator cuff muscles exercises are a really good idea, and it's a group of muscles. I'm not going to go into individual ones because there's not really need for that. This is more of like a functional approach than an anatomical approach. But think of the way to strengthen the rotator cuff muscles is to do any sort of rotation of pulling outwards. And if you can do that, if you guys have a TheraBand, or if you want to get one, it's a really handy way of just even out your posture, and also even out because they also contribute to your arm placement when it comes to, for example, jazz or commercial. If you know that your arm placement isn't exactly, it could be improved, can say, if you improve the strength of your rotator cuff muscles, you'll be able to place your arms a little bit more clearer. So if you can always Google it or go on YouTube, rotator cuff, CUFF. You can always look at exercise, how to work on that. But generally speaking, rotator cuff muscles are responsible for stabilization of the shoulder joint, and they are found at the back of the shoulder, and that's all we need to know for now. Okay, right. So now we have a couple more muscles that we'd like to talk about. So the first one, there's two actually. One is the teres major, and another one is the teres minor. Same way as in here at the front of your pecs, you have the pectoralis major and minor. There's two muscles in your chest. There's also two muscles here at the back of your arm, and they are both responsible for actually different things. So one of them actually is one of the rotator cuff muscles, is the minor one, and the major one isn't, but that really doesn't matter at all. And let's just talk about teres muscles, right? So if you look over here to the left, you can see that this is so this is your teres minor muscle, and it goes from it sort of connects the outside of your scapula here and the outside of your humerus here. So it's quite a short muscle. It's about this long, and it sort of is in between here, and it's between sort of like the middle ridge of your scapula in here. And what it actually does, it facilitates exactly what I just told you in a minute ago. It's not the only muscle that does that, but it allows your shoulder to rotate outwards this way. And it connects the shoulder to your scapula, right? And allows you to pull it outwards. On the contrary, there's a teres major muscle that is not on the outside, but actually originates on the inside and connects the inside of your humerus with your scapula, and that one facilitates the opposite. So that one facilitates the pulling in and rotation in. But if you look at the the size of those two muscles, you can see that the minor is a lot smaller than the major. And generally, the major one tends to be finer, but it's the minor one that's the one that tends to be weak. The one that, because the minor one, if you look at the way it's positioned right on the outside of your shoulder going to the back, because it's from the outside of your humerus and the middle of your scapula. So it sort of sits on your shoulder like that. So it tends to, if it becomes weak, then it allows your shoulder to travel forward, and it becomes weak very often. So that's why exercises like this help us to tone the teres minor muscles. And teres major is responsible for pulling inwards one, and that's a hypertonic muscle. That's, you know, that is the one that's not really causing us too many issues. So that's your teres major and teres minor. You want to think about the minor one being the smaller one, and because it's smaller, it's weaker. And if it's weaker, and if it's in the shoulder, you know that it's always going to be at the back. So you can infer it that way, yeah? Because we know that shoulder muscles at the front are always heavy and want to work all the time, and at the back are a little bit lazy. We need to work on them. So minor is smaller, and minor is at the back, because we need to work on it and activate it and make sure that it's got a good tension in it, right? Okay. And we've got one more muscle in here before we conclude, guys, and that is your infraspinatus muscle, and that actually sits on top of your teres minor. If you look at here at the top, and it connects your scapula with your outside of your humerus, and again it facilitates the outward rotation. So it's your infraspinatus and your teres minor that allow you to do this. I mean, this is not a muscle, this is not a motion that you would do very often, really, is it? It's not like you would grab something and pull it this way by keeping your elbow in, but that's how that muscle can be really activated the best. The main function of that muscle is just the stabilization of your shoulder, essentially, yeah, in this back direction. This is the way that you can activate it, but even though if you don't work on it, it's resting tension of that muscle that affects the stability of the shoulder. So if it's weak and if it's slightly elongated, that means that it lets your shoulder ride forward, and that's not something you want. Okay, guys, so I'm just going to come out of this, and I'm going to come on to muscle in motion, and let's have a little look at the muscles that I've been looking at, right? So I'm going to go to torso, right, and we're going to have a look at the trapezius muscle. Right, so this is the trapezius muscle working all together. So you can see you've got these upper lines, and they sort of go a little bit further inwards. You've got these inner lines, and you've got these downer sort of lines at the bottom, right? Where these upper ones, if we have it, because this is your entire muscle, if I was to just click on the upper trapezius, this happens, right? So by contracting this muscle, you're raising your shoulder together. If I'm going to go in here into the middle trapezius, this happens, bringing your shoulders right back together. And if I click on the lower trapezius, you're pushing your shoulders down. This is actually shown really quite well, where he's sort of pushing something down like a springs with his shoulders down. Yeah, so that is the one that's responsible for keeping your shoulders down, and that's the that is the one that is the hypotonic one. That's the lazy one that we need to tone all the time and make sure it works. Okay, so that's your trapezius. Then we talked about your lats. If you look, this is how huge this muscle is. This covers your entire back. If we click on it and have a look at the animation, it then works in various different ways. It works in sort of again, you can sort of condition it in these ways, but primarily its resting tension contributes to your correct posture, because if your lats are weak, then they allow your shoulders to either raise up or ride forward. Yeah, so it's the resting tension that needs to be optimal for your optimal posture. And yeah, so that's your lats muscles. And then we were looking for, this is your infraspinatus. I'm going to remove a layer. If you look, this you're looking somebody from the back, right? And if you look at it from here, the top layer of everything is the deltoids and your traps, right, in the upper shoulder. If you remove that layer, then below you've got this infraspinatus over here. It's like a slightly different color. And it goes from this ridge here outwards to your shoulders. And you can see that it's sort of almost like a continuous slide with the rhomboids. So infraspinatus and rhomboids are almost like on the same plane, if you will, because they are connected. There's this ridge on your shoulder blade, and then the infraspinatus sort of comes in from one, and then that's where the rhomboid starts and continues onwards. So if I click on the infraspinatus muscle, it shows you how exactly is it being sort of conditioned, how exactly is it working. Yeah, so you've got the yeah, so you've got the origin of the muscle here. We always know that the origin is closer to the midline, so origin is the big one, and the insertion point is what is being pulled towards the origin. So insertion point is being pulled towards the origin, and that's on the outside of your humerus, and this is your infraspinatus muscle, right? And if I then go back here, you can have a look in, yeah, we don't have to break that one down, that one's fine, right? And if I go over here, it's not very precise in the way it lights up, but the teres minor is there. It's the one directly underneath. Where I click on that, and this is your teres minor. So very similar to the picture from the PowerPoint presentation, yeah, where it connects the outside of your shoulder to the middle scapula, and by contracting, it allows you to bring your arm outwards. As I said before, this is not something you would do very often, but if you want to condition the back of your shoulder to increase its stability in this sort of direction, then this is the way that you would you would be able to direct effort towards it, towards both teres minor and your infraspinatus muscle. And then if we look at the teres major, I'm going to have to remove some layers here. So teres major is here. So we write it directly underneath, and it looks a little bit bigger if you look at it, yeah? And it does the opposite. It does the internal rotation. Okay, right. So what could happen, for example, in like a test environment, or in is you could get a question like sort of which muscles contribute to shoulder stability, something like that, right? As in which muscles contribute to shoulder stability at the back, so at the posterior location, and you probably have like a multiple choice. So one of those answers would be teres minor and infraspinatus, for example, right? So you know that it's always the muscles at the back that contribute to its stability, because the muscles at the front are already hyperactive and they are already working, they're fine. But if you want to stabilize it, you have to work on the muscles that are weak, okay? Also in the test could be questions like, what is the relationship between upper and lower trapezius? It'll be either agonist or antagonist, or neither, something like that. Yeah, and you know that they're antagonists because they work on opposite movements. The upper trapezius brings the shoulders up, like the lower one brings the shoulders down. Or you can have a question like, what's the relationship between lats and lower trapezius? And you'd say it's they're agonist muscles because they work on the same thing, because they push the shoulders down, etc., etc. Yeah. So we've covered quite a lot today. We talked about the muscles around your neck. We talked about the sternocleidomastoid. We talked about the scalene muscles. We talked about the lunate scapula. And we talked about the rhomboids bringing over here. And then we also covered the trapezius, upper, middle, and lower. Yeah. We talked about lats that come sort of right underneath it. And then we talked about the back muscles of the shoulder, which is the teres major and minor, and infraspinatus so far. And we've done quite a lot of progress today. I've got quite a lot done today. So then when I see you next week, we can then go back, we can recap, spend maybe an hour just recapping and not do too much progress next week. And then yeah, I think we've got maybe another 2 sessions to be able to cover what we need to cover. And then we can just continue to recap, and I can sort of give you things to study from and give you things to practice, etc. So we are in good standing at the moment, because you have your assessment, I think, is about 5 weeks. So I assume that we will get everything done, need to get done within probably next 2 weeks, I think. And then we'll have another 3 weeks to go over. You guys can get to ask questions. And I think what I'll do is I'll give you sort of independent work to do, and I'll sort of just be here on Teams checking with you whether you're doing it. You can send it to me and whatever, so that we can make sure that the last at least 2 weeks preferably 3 weeks, can be spent just going over and, you know, you understanding exactly what you need to know and what you need to do. Right, it's 2:15. That's it from me. Apologies for the nonsense internet. I don't know what's going on with Sky today. Have a good rest of the day, guys, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Yeah, see you later. Bye.